Well, it's a pleasure to welcome back Roy Snell to the studio for part two of our interview on his latest book, Integrity Works. So Roy, welcome back.
Glad to be here, sir.
So Roy, there was a chapter that I found extremely engaging called The Bias Effect. And you share, and I'm quoting here, how many good people suffer various types of cognitive biases that distort their thinking and bring them to inaccurate conclusions. Now, Roy, I can't remember where, but I remember reading somewhere that the tough part about biases and blind spots is that they convince us that we don't have any. So is that why you focused on this?
Right. Our biases can prevent us from understanding that biases can prevent us from integrity. What was really interesting, Charles Lord did a study on overcoming bias, and a lot of people, by the way, that's probably the most popular chapter now that people have seen the book a little bit. And I think it's because they think I didn't know there was quite so many, and I kind of got that one, and I have that one, and this one I've seen other people have, and it's terrible. Charles Lord proved that just telling people not to have them or building their awareness, like I have in the book by listing them, it doesn't really help you overcome them. The way to overcome them that he has proven, and I have subsequently found out from experts like Jerry Zak, the new CEO of SCCE and HCCA, is a concept called consider the opposite.
Okay.
If you really want to filter out your bias on a particular issue, make a decision, go through the process and make a decision, and now go back and do your best to seek out information that disproves what you just decided to do. What do people who think the opposite of what you just decided to do say? And through that, the people in his study were able to overcome their bias, and so that was an important revelation to me. That, and then not too surprising that just talking about this stuff doesn't really help. You have to implement a step in your life, and that's what my book is all about: is various steps you can take in the process of doing things that involve integrity, as opposed to just saying, go do a good job and do the right thing and be ethical. It doesn't work too well. I'm sure it helps a little, and we want tone at the top and a positive culture and all those sorts of things, but people really need some tools, and one of them can be tools associated with bias, and there's just some absolutely fascinating forms of bias that people never thought of and that exist. And once they read them, they go, yeah, I believe that's there. I didn't realize it was.
Okay, so let's get to a few of them. One that I see is very much alive in our field is confirmation bias. And here I'm thinking, I'm putting on my former commercial hat here, of the compliance implications of people in the field, Roy, often in high-risk regions, that might spend more time with their peers, their friends, and their clients than they do with their supervisors. So for those employees who might face certain ethical struggles or ethical dilemmas and who need support, it's quite likely that they're going to reach out to those same people, right? Their friends, their peers, their clients, and their colleagues. Some of those people that face the same issues that they do, they're going to them for support, maybe knowing that they're going to get the response that they're looking for.
Yeah.
How do we get those employees turning to the people, whether it's compliance or their manager or their supervisor, but the people who want them successful and safe and who are much less likely to be a partner in conformity or confirmation bias?
Well, once again, the answer to dealing with bias is to, when you make a decision that you think is potentially troublesome from an ethical or a matter of integrity, you've got to go out and try and disprove what you're about to do.
Okay.
However, and particularly when we were talking a little bit about today, you had talked about these accountability partners. I would apply it here also. Is
Sure.
just say, you've got to build in this thing into your life of calling people who will tell you the thing you need to hear sometimes when you maybe don't want to hear it. Let me give you a great example. If somebody messes up, they tend to go home and talk to their family, and they share the facts probably pretty biasly. And the family says, "Oh yeah, there are a bunch of terrible people that you had to deal with, and you're right and they're wrong." This just isn't the way to deal.
Right.
To have integrity. You've got to realize that you've got to what's really important is find an expert. Okay, not just another person with an opinion, but an expert in the subject matter of the thing that you're trying to decide that might have an element of integrity in it, and that individual has to be a person of high integrity, someone
Okay.
who won't tell you what you need to hear, but won't tell you what you want to hear, but will tell you what you need to hear.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge that a little bit. So we've got person A in the field, a former Richard Bistrong, right, struggling with ethical decisions. Now, you can't stop people from turning to their peers and their colleagues
Right.
for help. They're going to do that. So here's my thing about accountability partners. If you've got a mentor-mentee relationship, right, with that person working in a pretty volatile environment, from my perspective, accountability has to work both ways. So if that accountability partner hasn't heard from his or her mentee, then isn't it the accountability partner's responsibility to say, I haven't heard from this person in a while.
Yeah.
I know they're struggling, so I'm going to call them and find out what's going on.
Yeah, I think that is, if you can get into that environment, if you can have that kind of relationship with somebody, and I have a couple of people in my life who might call me out without me initiating the discussion.
There you go.
And frankly, they do it very carefully. They call up and get me on the subject, so I kind of bring it up, and that opens the door for them to say, "Oh, now that you mention that, maybe you ought to think about this in this situation." So really, I think what you're suggesting is that there are people who might listen to this that think about integrity two ways: my integrity and the integrity of those around you. We are all accountability partners for others. We are all mentors for someone or some small group of people. And to take the initiative, your idea to take the initiative is a grand idea. And maybe it's something companies could do or compliance professionals could do, is encourage a stronger mentor-mentee, accountability partner. I actually would consider not calling it mentoring. I would call it an accountability partner, because people are tired of hearing, "Oh yeah, mentors and I got them." And
I got plenty of those.
but really, it's more succinct than that. What you're talking about in that article is about helping people out in certain situations. We could work both sides in our compliance programs. Go get help, go be help, and to me that would be more substantive than standing at a pulpit saying do the right thing, which is, kind of sums up my view of all the ethical talking that goes on. I want more substance. I want steps. I want action. I want procedures. I want tools. That's what this book is about, and what I wish people would do more than just speaking philosophically or psychologically, but taking tools to solve the problem as opposed to yammering. And your perspective on this is really helpful.
Thank you. I mean, there are a number of different pieces of research that I've read that have said the more we're talking to each other, let's call it that accountability partner. When there's not a problem,
Yeah.
the more likelihood we're going to pick up the phone and ask for help when there is one.
Yeah, it's maybe people listening, anybody listening who has someone in their life that feels that they are their mentor, call them today.
Yeah, just hey, how things are going. So let's move over to another one on my top 10, sunk cost bias, okay? Broadly defined as scenarios where maybe we've invested time and energy in a project, where new information might come our way later on that might warrant a rethinking of our decisions, and that maybe we should change path, but according to sunk cost bias, it's much more likely that we're not going to change path, even if we should. And I've read some other research around escalation of commitment, which addresses how the closer we are to the finish line, the more risk we're going to take to get there. So combining these
Yes.
forces, right, of sunk cost, escalation of commitment, which keep us on a trajectory that might need to be changed, Roy, those are very powerful biases that I think can get between our desired behavior and our actual behavior. So speaking to compliance professionals, how do they mitigate these two very real world biases with the workforce? Like, how can we even be sensitized and aware of them?
Yeah, again, getting
There's a lot in that question,
Yeah,
so
but
unpack it as you see
well,
fit.
and follow up with specific questions. But I want to talk about one thing in particular that I saw a lot. I would see stuff that our organization was doing and wasn't quite working. And because people had a lot of vested interest and effort and emotion and these sorts of things,
Sure.
then they didn't realize that a real good option on occasion is just stop it.
Right.
Don't go any further.
Hit the pause button.
Throw it away. What I think the natural tendency is to try and tweak it a little and make it better. I actually witnessed an entire organization that couldn't reset or hit the pause button, and they kept trying to tweak what it was they were doing and failed. And this can affect integrity if you've committed to do something, and it turns out over time, you got a lot of time, you got all effort, maybe got your reputation, and people are watching you, and you come to learn that where you're headed might not be the best from an ethical standpoint. It's really hard for people to pull out and stop and restart. Maybe a better example would be is a relationship you have with someone, and over time you discover that relationship is harmful to your integrity. It's someone whose integrity maybe isn't terribly sharp, and you didn't realize it right away. And I think some of us have a hard time walking away. I have some discussion in the book about you are who you hang around with all day. And so hang around with the right people. And in the book, I make this comment also, is set down the book right now and email or call somebody to set up a lunch or whatever with somebody that you think is a really great influence on your life. Take action now. Stop talking and do something. So I hope I got close to your...
Absolutely. But, given, as I think you well said, we're much more likely to have minor degrees of calibration as opposed to just re-engineering the whole thing, especially if we're close to the finish line. What are some of the things that you've seen that can get us to hit the pause button and to say, you know what, we need to put a fresh set of eyes on this because we may be headed in a direction that we didn't start out at.
It's our colleagues. Here's another way to come at this, is that if you think you might have a problem like this, I would consider finding a completely unbiased expert, somebody who's dealt with what you're doing about 30 times and doesn't need your money or your accolades or your relationship or anything. Too often we'll go out and just grab our general legal counsel and bring them in for a very specific question when there's somebody else out there with 30 years of experience in this very exact problem. Not a lot of problems like it. And then also the people who are regular providers of service have this regular flow of income that it causes them a little bias, might tell you what you want to hear. Enron suffered from this immensely by their advisors who were counting on a lot of money annually, would tell them what they want to hear. I want something who knows they might not ever get another buck from me and that have done the same thing 30 times. If you really need to hear the bad news like Enron did and they didn't get it, you've got to go to some impartial, very experienced person who can kind of sit you down and tell you, what are you thinking here? And they walk away and they may never come back into your life. People don't value that enough, that impartial observer with tons of experience. We tend to kind of go to people we know, and for a lot of stuff that's probably okay, but as Enron and Penn State and Michigan State University and Wells Fargo and many others have proved, in a time of need for sorting out a particular tough issue of integrity, they just appeared to me to have gone to a lot of sycophants and got really bad advice.
I've often shared in our anti-bribery world that taking sales executives that have worked in some tricky regions that have succeeded in the right places for the right reasons, bring them back to headquarters. They make a great source of integrity to look at things, to look at contracts, even in the late stages. People that are maybe close to retirement that, as you said, they don't have any skin in the game except to see the next generation succeed for the right reasons. They can be such a great resource.
I'm going to redescribe what you just said in a little different way. Is maybe a compliance professional, and I know you teach this all the time. I'm going to phrase it a little differently. It's your idea.
But you're probably going to state it better than I did.
I'm just going to take your idea and extrapolate. So what you're talking a little bit about is bring in the sales force who might be having a little groupthink, and you bring them into the people who will not participate probably in that groupthink. Well, why not extrapolate that to compliance professionals who are looking to prevent integrity issues and do a little risk assessment of where the groupthink is going on. I can't imagine that the sales force, although one of the most obvious groupthink groups, is the only groupthink group. So maybe everybody out there listening to this should just take a couple hours, maybe chat with some other people who might know where the groupthink is going on and disrupt it. I got to try and remember that. If I write another book, I'm putting your idea in there.
Well, it's sort of in there, and we'll talk about that in our next interview segment, which is about sort of ethical dilemma workshops where you can combine cross-functional groups. But let's talk about sleep for a little while. I'm not getting enough of it in my overseas travel, and now I have a watch and a ring that every morning will give me the analytics on how lousy of a night of sleep I had the night before. But with that said, in all seriousness, you were spot on when talking about how sleep deprivation and fatigue can have a damaging effect on integrity and decision making. But Roy, we're working in this 24/7 cycle of information where commercial and operations teams, I mean, Roy, they may be separated by double-digit time zones, and we're just communicating away. So are we making a bad problem worse with respect to our communication expectations? And is there anything that we can do to help people and maybe slow down this communication highway?
Yeah, just yesterday I did some work. It involved 7 hours of really intense discussion, and I got fatigued, and I ended up getting cranky, and I make bad decisions or say things incorrectly. Anger hurts integrity greatly. If you just look at the political scene in the country, anger is causing people to say things that are not true, and they lack integrity. So I'm going to take this in a rather bizarre direction. Over the last 10 years, probably one of my best advisors on our board at SCCE and HCCA, a fellow named Dan Roach, and I happened to find out about 14 years ago, we had an interest in the wilderness, and I mean really deep into the wilderness, and places in Canada in particular. And we looked for 4 years and bought a place, and it's you basically drive straight north from Minnesota to the last town and go 50 miles east, of which 40 miles is a logging road and about 13 miles up a river. There's literally no road to our lake. There's a couple of abandoned buildings on our lake, but no people ever go by. And here's my point.
And I'm from New York City. Like Central Park is wilderness to me, Roy.
And by the way, I love New York City. I've worked here for a year and a half, but it is the antithesis of what I'm talking about.
So I didn't mean to derail your story. Back to the wilderness.
So here's my point, and to your point, is that it's really hard to reflect in the rat race. Now, that is a term that's not used much. Back in the 60s, when we went from primarily an agrarian lifestyle, farming and whatnot, to an awful lot of busy city stuff, a lot of people left the city and said, I'm leaving the rat race. And somehow that stuck with me like crazy my whole life. And now, of course, with social media and all the other things, we are living in an environment that we were not really built for, and it creates it hampers our integrity. And I would just suggest this. I throw this out there. I don't know how many people can do this, but if you go into a place like Dan and I have created, and we've taken many people there that are in a bad way, either health-wise or there was in 2008 a couple of friends of mine who business suffered greatly, and I literally forced one of them with the help of his wife up to this place. It is very difficult to reflect here in the rat race, and it could be any city in the country. Sure. Just New York's bigger. We all have the problem in Minneapolis, wherever. And it's very hard to sit and reflect, which integrity requires a lot of. And it requires a calm mind and a non-stressed environment. Sure. Okay, well, you contrast that with the people we've taken to Canada over the last 10 years. It's impossible not to reflect there. You cannot walk out of the cabin at the end of dinner and look out over this lake and maybe a sunset and empty shoreline for miles and not reflect. So integrity requires reflection. Our rat race has created, including the new advent of social media and such, 24-hour news cycle and all that, we have created an absolutely horrible environment for integrity. And you're absolutely right. Not just sleep deprivation, but all sorts of other negative side effects of the world we have created. And in part, it's kind of why I wrote the book. It might be the reason why I wrote the book is I think the people of our culture need this right now more than ever.
Well, then, talking about slowing down and reflection, this will be a good time to take a pause, and we'll look forward to part 3 of our interview.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Roy.